Hey there. Welcome to another episode of Tinnitist TV. Today, I am talking to Jock Bartley of Firefall. He's a guy who knows a classic rock track when he hears one, and he should. After all, he and his band wrote a few of their own back in the 70s, including You Are the Woman, Just Remember I Love You, and Strange Way. Now, on their aptly titled new album, Friends and Family, the long-running Colorado band turned the tables and covers some vintage hits by former tourmates and bandmates like the Doobie Brothers, Lynyrd Skynyrd, the band, Graham Parsons, Hart, and more. But instead of just Xeroxing the songs, Bartley and Firefall retool them with inventive arrangements and instrumentation, putting their own new stamp on a collection of old favorites. A few weeks before Friends and Family arrived, Bartley zoomed in to talk about cover tunes, the band's 50th anniversary, his time with Parsons, and plenty more. Enjoy. We are here today to talk about, of course, the new Firefall album, which is called Friends and Family. And it's a covers album, but it's kind of a concept covers album in a way, which is sort of unique. Rather than me explain it to people, why don't you explain it to people?
About a year and a half ago, Firefall's manager, Lynn Fico, who's also our record label, said to me, you know, the original members of Firefall back in the 70s played in a lot of other famous bands, like the Byrds, Flying Burrito Brothers, Spirit, Heart, JoJo Gunn, in my case with Graham Parsons, the Flying Burrito Brothers. Why don't you guys do an album of their songs? And I went, great idea. And the light bulb went on. I said, you know, let's expand that idea, because in 1976, when our first album hit big, we toured with all the top bands of the era, pretty much. Fleetwood Mac, the Doobie Brothers, Loggin Messina, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Marshall Tucker. Unbelievable. I said, let's do a song of theirs too. And Lynn said, God, that's great. Yeah, that's great. And when he heard, now with that, my friend, comes great responsibility, because to me, a lot of songs that would be available that would fit into that are kind of hands off and you should never do them. Like, for instance, Lynn said, wow, you guys played with the band, Levon Helm, Robbie Robertson and everybody.
Yeah.
I said, yeah. He said, great, you can do Up on Cripple Creek. And I went, no friggin' way. You know, Levon Helm is the only guy that should ever sing Up on Cripple Creek.
Okay.
You know, and you know, some of the choices were really easy to pick. Angry Eyes by Loggins and Messina was right up our wheelhouse, you know, and we got to be really good friends with Kenny Loggins and Jim Messina. But then, you know, some of the songs were like, well, which Doobie Brothers song do we do? Or which Heart song to do? Now, our new lead vocalist bass player, who replaced Mark Andes, the original Firefall bassist, who retired right before we were going to make this record. It was like, oh my God, who are we going to have to make this record now? You know, John Bisaha, who also plays in the band The Babies,
right,
who's a great vocalist. You know, when I put it out there on, well, what Heart song should we do? Because, you know, the Wilson sisters, and, you know, you got to be careful there. And certainly many of their songs would not be appropriate. And songs like Barracuda are hands off, you know, no way, we can't do that one. John said to me, I could really sing What About Love really good. And I went, really? Okay, you're on. And John is also with me, friends with Howard Leese from Heart. And I asked Howard, hey, Howard, we're going to do What About Love. How about you play some power guitars and maybe even do the solo on this song? And he said, great, let me listen to it. And then he said, well, you know, you changed the chords a little bit on me. I can't play the original solo I played. And I said, I don't want you to. Play something new, you know? And so we had some guest stars on this record, including Howard, who played a great guitar solo. Yes. And John Jorgensen, you know, the world famous, you know, master of guitar, played on our Birds song. Right. So, you know, that Heart song, you know, that was really great, you know, and for me as leader of Firefall and also producer of this album, I wanted to keep things kind of sparse because a lot of production nowadays is overproduced and strings and animated vocals and all this stuff. Excuse me. I wanted this album to just stand up and let the song shine with our versions of it.
And it does, for sure. I'm glad you brought up that approach to picking the songs, because one of the first things that kind of leapt out at me when I was listening to it is that these are deeper cuts and songs that you wouldn't expect. I would never expect anybody to cover the band's Chest Fever, for instance, but you guys do a great job of it. I mean, and ditto Fleetwood Mac, World Turning, even the Burrito and Parsons songs are not necessarily the go-tos, you know?
Right. Well, at times, and you can believe that our record label said, oh no, you got to do some hits. Okay, we'll do some hits. But again, like I knew that no matter what Doobie Brothers song we picked, there were going to be thousands of Doobie Brother fans, pissed off and going, how dare they do that song? And on what we chose was Long Train Running, which was one of the last songs we picked out of the 13 to do. And as you listen, to me, like the signature guitar part that Tommy Johnson played, everybody knows. And I decided to kind of feature the second guitar part and make that original signature guitar part a little less in your face. And we added the sax. So I wasn't opposed to, adding a few new things and taking a song a slightly different direction. And yet on other songs, like Part of the Plan by Dan Fogelberg, we kept that one pretty much like Dan's song. Yeah. And the late, great Dan Fogelberg, I mean, unbelievable. And, even if Firefall would have really kept everything exactly the same, it wouldn't have sounded like the original because it's a different vocalist, different guitar sounds, different studio technology, all of that. But I, as a lead guitar player, really wanted to not only be respectful and loving and true to those bands and the songs they played, but also to the lead guitar players. I mean, when I was cutting the solos on Can't You See by Marshall Tucker, I was thinking about Toy Caldwell. And I didn't know him really well, but he and I, compared Gibson Les Pauls a couple of times, and I got to know him. And though I didn't, copy his licks, I was thinking Toy the whole way. And also the same thing with Lynyrd Skynyrd. Those guys, the original Lynyrd Skynyrd, the three guitar players were just in your face. Mm-hmm. And I wanted my guitar to kind of honor them too. And, I don't know how successful I was, but I really like this album.
Oh yeah, I think you were pretty successful, and I like it too. And another of the reasons I like it is what we've been talking about, which is that a lot of these songs aren't just slavish covers. You're not, as you said, afraid of rearranging the songs and the instrumentation and making them your own, but without destroying the essence of the song. Like you said, with the Doobie Brothers song, it takes a few seconds before your ears kind of go, oh, wait a second, this is that.
And I didn't know how successful our version of that was. We made it as good as we could make it, and I produced it how I did, and then our manager said, well, that's the first single. And I went, really? Yeah, that's got to start the album. And I went, really? Now he changed his mind and decided to put Simple Man, the Lynyrd Skynyrd song, out as the first single, which is the only song currently that people can listen to. Right. The album comes out in, I think, September 20th or something. But the second single is the Doobie Brothers song, Long Train Running. And, I know and love those guys. And what was interesting, too, to me, when Firefall toured with the Doobies in 76 and 77 and 78, it was the Michael McDonald Skunk Baxter Doobies.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't the original
Right.
Listen to the music doobies.
Right.
You know, somebody suggested, hey, you can do listen to the music. And I went, no, that's the wrong song. Fleetwood Mac was another one that was hard to choose.
I would think.
Oh my God. You know, and looking back, that was, you know, I mean, when we toured with the band in 1976, their last tour, that was just unbelievable. And I used to sit behind the curtain 10 feet away from Levon Helm and just watch him do his thing.
Yeah.
And he was, you know, such a funky drummer and a great singer and a funky guy. Oh man, it was just great. But the Fleetwood Mac one, I'm going, you know, those were the best gigs we ever played. You know, like in 1977 and 78, we were playing stadium shows in front of 60 and 70,000 people opening for Fleetwood Mac.
Good gig.
And I didn't know which one to pick. Yeah. And in fact, Mark Andes, when he was still in the band and we were looking at songs, he said, how about World Turning? And I went, bingo, you know. And it wasn't a big hit for off their first album with Stevie and Lindsey. But, you know, I tried to keep it true to that. And I really like our version of World Turning.
Oh yeah, were some of these arrangements, was coming up with them a matter of trial and error, or were they all just pretty quick in your mind of, oh, I know what we can do?
Wasn't really trial and error. The picking of the songs was like, and sometimes we'd have it down to 2 or 3 songs, and like, which one?
Did you record all two or three, or did you eventually?
No, we didn't. Now the thing is too is, you know, I know how to make good Firefall records after 40 years. I hope I do. And there were times when, well, like on World Turning, I cut, being true to Lindsey's guitar parts on World Turning, I cut like 4 acoustic guitar parts doing that and an electric part to a click track and then send it to the drummer and then send it to the bass player email. And a few of those songs we never played live together. We kind of built up the way some people make records now. And it turned out really good, but particularly now with the singers I've got, Steve Weinmeister was in the band as a lead vocalist for like 25 years, and then he quit. And then, you know, and we made the Comet record with a different singer, Gary Jones, and he rejoined right about the time he rejoined. And then John Bisaha is an amazing singer, you know, and we've had great singers in Firefall, and Rick and Larry were the best singing their own songs from the early days and the early albums. But I've never had an LA guy that can go and be a rock star singer on stage. So as soon as John and Steve rejoined the band, you know, our vocals went over the top. And as a producer, I didn't really care if I sang at all, you know, on this record. I'm the third low part singer. It's like, oh yeah, I'll sing on this one, I guess. And I allowed myself to sing 3 songs, but having those guys and being behind the glass with them singing harmony vocals, it was just a pure joy for me.
Oh, I bet. And I mean, those harmonies are kind of a signature of the band. And it's remarkable to me too, that, I mean, you know, over the years, things have changed and you've had people come and go and in and out, but you listen to these songs, and if you ever listen to Firefall at any point in your life, or even if you ever heard it on the radio, you're going to hear these songs and go, oh yeah, okay, that sounds like Firefall, even though it's, you know, maybe a different cast of characters.
Right. And even, you know, and particularly on the Heart song that we did, What About Love, once we started building that song up in the studio, it was reminiscent of our big hit Strange Way. So I tried to beef that up and kind of, okay, change the bass part a little bit. Let's kind of play it like Strange Way. So it was really fun doing this collection of songs. And I have a scoop for you. We're already starting Friends and Family too.
Of course.
And picking those songs, same deal. It's like, okay, which one now? And we are going to do So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star by the Byrds. And I will tell you that we are going to do Love the One You're With by Stephen Stills.
Nice. You know, I was wondering why there was no Stills on this one, because
you know, even though a lot of the 70s great songs were open in this concept, some weren't. We never played with or did shows with Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Right.
Now, Rick Roberts, our original lead singer and writer of most of our hits, he played with Stephen And I was looking at still songs for this record, but when we had 13 or 14 already, I said, well, if we do another one, we'll put it in there. So you're right. And Steven's brilliant and has such great songs. And the main thing that we tried to do was be loving, respectful, and honoring not only the band's songs that we did, but that time in music, which the late 60s and the 70s in American music, I don't think will ever be duplicated.
No, I agree. And I mean, between the Beatles album that you guys did and this album, and even some of Comet, it kind of feels like you've been in a fairly nostalgic frame of mind lately. Is there something particular that kind of prompted that?
When we made Comet and Mark Andes had been in the band again for about 5 or 6 years, I really pushed him to do Nature's Way, the Randy California Spirit song.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I don't know. And I said, you can sing it, Mark. He goes, I don't know, but that kind of led us into really kind of focusing back in the 70s. And when I wrote the song Way Back When on Comet, which is totally an honoring and a tribute to how great the music of the 60s was. And when I was writing the lyrics, it had to be about the Byrds too. So that meant to me it had to be 65 because the Beatles and the Stones were 64 and the Byrds hadn't really happened yet, So the 3 years on Way Back When were 65, 67, and 69. And a tribute to Aretha Franklin and Creedence Clearwater and George Harrison. And it's just like, I guess it goes back to, and it's a really good question, I think, Daryl, that, we're so lucky to have the past we have. And Firefall was lucky and fortunate and deserved to be a small part of that music of the 70s. When you think about, the Eagles and the Doobie Brothers and Little River Band and just all the Dan Fogelberg, all the great artists making music back in the 70s. And of course, we all as songwriters learned from the Beatles, the best band ever, that you could write your own songs. And the 70s was a fruition of that, and that leads me to a quick little story. I met Rick Roberts, who had replaced Graham Parsons in the Flying Burrito Brothers, when I fell into Graham and Emmy Lou's touring band, the Fallen Angels, for about 2 months. And Rick Roberts came and saw us play in New York City. And that's where I met Rick. And we said, you live in Boulder? I live in Boulder. Hey, we should get together. We did about 6 months later. And Rick thought he was going to be making his third solo record, and I'd be one of his primary guitar players. And then when Mark Andy started jamming with us, it started feeling like a band and not a Rick Roberts solo album. And Rick said, I know this guy, Larry Burnett, in Washington, D.C. He writes songs. He's a great singer. You want to hear a song? And Mark and I went, sure. This was before cassette tape, so we put a reel-to-reel tape on. And the first song we heard of Larry's was Cinderella. And it was like, get him out here. The end of this story is when Larry came out and we started practicing, Rick Roberts, Larry Burnett, me, Mark Andes. We had a different drummer a few months before Michael Clark joined. We didn't have a band name yet. We didn't have any gigs, but we had 25 original songs to work out in that first week.
Yeah.
From Rick and Larry, and Mark and I are going, wow, what else you got? And 4 or 5 of those songs from our first week of rehearsal ended up being on our album a year and a half later. Mexico, Cinderella, Livin' Ain't Livin', It Doesn't Matter. Unbelievable, because when bands form, 95% of the time, you don't really know what you're going to sound like. And you don't have the songs yet because you haven't figured them out or written them. We started out with 25 songs of Rick and Larry's, and no wonder our first album ended up being so good, because that was all their songs and us playing them really magically.
Yeah. It feels like an internet mistake, but I can't find any record of you guys ever winning or even being nominated for a Grammy.
No, we never were.
What the hell, man?
I don't know. What's kind of weird now is I know a few people who put out these lists of the top albums of 1976, and they'll put 30 albums on there, and our Firefall album's not on there. And I'm going, what do we chop liver here? But you know what? There was just so much good music that I can see how we might have been overlooked. And even today, frankly, people go, Firefall, who's that? I don't know if I think I've heard that name. And then you go, you are the woman that,
yeah, exactly. You're like a character actor of bands, you're not the star of the show, but you see that's that guy with that thing,
Yeah, exactly. I just know how lucky I am to have joined into a band that had such great songs. Yeah. And to me, it's got to be the songs.
Right.
The Eagles wouldn't have been the Eagles without the songs.
Little River Band. Anybody writing those kinds of songs today? Do you hear anything happening that interests you or excites you in the same way music of that era did?
Not really.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of it is pop music that's just warmed over hits to get on, to get attention and make money for the writers and the record label. Right. Back in the 70s, it was, excuse me, it was interesting because the record labels hadn't got their iron fist on things yet. Right. And they allowed bands to be what they were and play the music they were. And not until maybe the early 80s is, when the record labels started dictating, no, you need to be more this or that, or, whatever. And hey, Milli Vanilli, it's like, back in the 70s, it was just such a fertile time. And the intermingling of Southern California bands and artists, and Joni Mitchell and Crosby, Stills and Nash and Poco and the Eagles and, all this stuff. And then interestingly enough, so many of the Southern California rockers got tired of living in LA and moved to the mountains above Boulder, like Stephen Stills, Chris Hillman, Richie Fury, Dan Fogelberg, Joe Walsh, Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. It was amazing, and Boulder was really fertile, and it all kind of coagulated and got together when Firefall started, and it, what an amazing time for music.
Totally.
That's all I can say.
Yeah, I mean, going back to Friends and Family, were there any songs that you tried that just didn't work out?
No.
So does that mean, could you take like any song more or less and turn it into a Firefall song? Do you think?
No. Well, like I said, there were some songs that were off limits.
Right, but if they weren't off limits, could you, just for pulling names out of a hat, if you wanted to cover ABBA or Aerosmith or AC/DC, could you take those songs and turn them into Firefall songs? Do you
Probably
think?
Not.
Uh-huh.
And that's why the way that the concept album happened, I mean, we couldn't do a Crosby, Stills and Nash song because we knew some of those guys, but we never toured with them. Stephen Stills, yes. David Crosby from the Byrds, yes. A Byrds song, a Burrito Brothers song. So that that narrowed our scope of what we could do. But like, for instance, on Friends and Family 2, I really want to do a Beach Boys song. Oh, yeah. And I don't know which one to go, because a few of the guys in the band have said, well, let's not do the hot rod car songs of their early days, right? In my room, or hey, let's do, and I'm going, wow, which one do we pick?
Well, there's so many good
in the selection.
Yeah, there's such a huge, all those early albums have so many hidden gems on them too. You scan through some of those and you'll find something great.
Right.
And you got to do a baby song.
I didn't mind choosing a song like the band Chest Fever, because, to me, the band was one of the most amazing and greatest American bands ever. Mm-hmm. Their first two albums, were just stunning how great and different they were. you know, and
you know
yeah,
why
they
they
were
were so great?
they,
Because four of
what?
them were Canadians.
Yeah. And what's interesting, I've read a number of books about the band, and in Levon Helm's book, he talks about they were all about the same age.
Yeah.
3 of them were in Canada, and he was in Arkansas, and they were all listening to this R&B station out of Memphis, Tennessee. So
Yeah.
they were all listening to the same music, except 3 of them were Canadians.
Yeah.
You know, but for me to have toured with the band and watched, I mean, they were astoundingly great. You know, there won't ever be another group like them, I don't think. You know, and then you hear stories after the fact that Eric Clapton wanted to join the band and went and hung out with them, and they're going, "Nah, we're good here. We're good."
Yeah, well, I mean, he was in the studio when you were cutting lead guitar lines, so you know.
Right. You know, what's really cool, and I mean, you know, I don't know, your fans may not know. I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but when I cut what ended up being the one take solo on Mexico, which I knew was going to be my song to really shine on the first record, I didn't know it at the time, but my hero Eric Clapton was watching me play in the studio at Criteria Studios right around his 461 Ocean Boulevard album time, you know, and it's a good thing I didn't know he was there, because I wouldn't have been able to play anything, you know. Yeah. But it's interesting because for me, well, nobody could do Jimi Hendrix. I mean, you know, you could try to sound like Jimi Hendrix, but without a stack of Marshalls and being Hendrix, forget it. That was kind of out, you know. But Eric Clapton, you know, Dave Mason's Alone Together album, you know, there were so many albums that I ingested and tried to learn every guitar lick I could off of Cream or some of those albums, you know. And then after Firefall was successful, there was a whole generation of young guys learning my licks.
Yeah.
And it's so great how it's circular, and you know, and it's like, wow. And for us now to be Firefall, to be doing other people's songs, which we've really never done. We've never had to, other than Nature's Way and maybe one other song, Staying With It, out of the 70s. We've always had plenty of really good songs to choose from. So for me, you know, I wasn't in a cover band. I was in a cover band when I was in college, and Firefall hit in the 70s, and I've never really played anybody else's songs in the last 35 or 40 years. And this was a joy, particularly trying to keep them, you know, keep them true to the original.
Yeah.
You know,
is there
great
anybody
concept.
Is there anybody that you would like to have cover one of your songs?
Haven't ever thought about that. And there have been a few people that covered a song of ours, but no, not really. I'll tell you what, though, there's certainly a couple of people I want to have as guest stars on this next Friends and Family 2 album. Okay. And we don't really know who that is yet. Right. And we're asking a few people, but you know, it was really great having some guest stars on this record. And I felt totally comfortable, you know, letting John Jorgensen play the solo on 12 string on You Feel a Whole Lot Better of the Birds, or letting Howard Leese have another crack at his solo on What About Love, the Heart song. Right. I've got an interesting thing about that song. So Howard Leese played with Paul Rodgers and Bad Company for the last 10 years, right? So he's a power, you know, kind of guitar player. When I asked him to play the solo and some power rhythm guitars, he sent me email. He emailed me back his solo, and it was a really clean, direct guitar, not through an amp, really nice selection of notes. But I'm going, you know, it needs some power. So, unfortunately, his engineer in LA printed the echo and the reverb on it.
Oh.
And so when I took a second track of Howard and put an amp simulator on it, the echo got so much that it was not good. it sounded good, but the echo was just going all over the place. And so I said, well, I guess what I better do is I'll learn Howard's solo with my guitar sound with no effects on it and play along. And so the solo you hear on that is three guys playing the same part.
Wow.
One Howard clean, one Howard dirty with too much echo, and with me with no effects. And we created this really great guitar solo, which was Howard's. I remember, I don't even know if I said this to you, but he said, yeah, I'd love to play the solo, but you changed the chords on me.
Right.
I can't play the same solo. I said, we don't want the same solo. Let's hear something new.
You're going to have to do a baby song on this second volume, right?
Maybe. That's being considered. I mean, John Waite, man.
Yeah.
Some of that baby stuff. And
John's first album is awesome.
Oh God. I thank you for suggesting that. I mean, we've talked about it, but we're going to have another Bird song, and we're going to have a Stephen Stills song, and we're already cutting another Fleetwood Mac song, which I think will be unnamed.
Wow.
But a baby song would maybe be a good idea.
Sure, Head Over Heels or Looking for Love, or there's lots that you figured out.
Yeah.
So I want to go back, if I could, a minute for a minute to your early days. I'm intrigued by obviously you touring with Graham and Emmylou, but before that you replaced Tommy Bolin in Zephyr.
I did.
What was that experience like at the time for you?
It was interesting, and one of the great things about Zephyr that came out of Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
I saw their first gig when Tommy sat in with him. He was the kid from out of town, the 19-year-old kid, hotshot guitar player, and he played with Candy and David in the band, and they were fantastic. The thing about Zephyr was, God, I need some water. Candy and David were powerhouse on stage. Excuse me.
Yep.
Cut that out. And they would have this thing going between Candy's harp and her voice and Tommy, and it was almost like they were fighting for the spotlight. No, it's mine. And they were great. I loved Zephyr. And at that time, I hadn't really started performing yet.
Right.
I was way into standing right next to my amp and playing tasty and kind of like being in my own little world and playing the best thing I could play at the time for the song,
right.
And when
this was out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. And when I joined into Zephyr, I remember our first gig or two, Candy's going, where's my guitar player? And I'm standing back by my amp, playing tasty. And she says, get out here with me. And I the performing part of guitaring, lead guitaring, came a little later for me. And speaking of Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harrison, the Fallen Angels, I was at the right place at the right time. I was no country picker,
Right.
And I tried to learn James Burton's licks, and they wanted Clarence White, who was playing in the Byrds, to go out on the road, and he couldn't, and they hired a guy that wasn't really too good, and I was better than him, but I wasn't a country picker. So, my style developed, and by the time I got with Rick Roberts, I was born to play some of those songs. Mexico, man.
Right. But at the time with Parsons, I mean, it's easy to look back with hindsight, obviously, and go, my God, what an incredible set of circumstances. Were you able to appreciate that in the moment, or was it all just kind of trying to hang on to the whirlwind as you were going,
I could appreciate it. And here's a great example of it. I sat in with the band. I heard them the first night they played in Boulder, the first night of their concert. And the manager of this club that they played in said, you should get down here. You might get a gig. Oh, yeah. Who with? Graham Parsons. Flying Breeder Brothers. Oh, okay. So I went down and heard them. They heard I was a guitar player in town and asked me to sit in with them the next night. I did, and I got hired. And the next morning we left at 9 a.m. on the bus, and I had like about 4 hours to pack and get my stuff together. And our first gig was in Austin at Armadillo headquarters.
Right.
And our second gig was at Liberty Hall in Houston. And on the last night of the Houston gigs, we're playing on stage, The Fallen Angels, and Neil Young and Linda Ronstadt come on to sit in with us. And I'm going, oh my God, 4 days earlier, I had been painting apartments in my apartment building to pay my rent, and practicing guitar and stuff. And now I'm on stage with Neil Young and Linda Ronstadt. Yeah. And the coolest thing was that was the first night that Emmylou and Linda ever met or sang together.
Right.
And Neil, after we, got off stage, invited everybody to go back to his hotel suite. 3 bands, Neil Young's band, Linda Ronstadt's band, and Graham Parsons' band. We all go back to Neil's hotel suite, massive quantities of everything. And Graham, like he did all the time, he immediately grabbed one of Neil's guitars and started playing 25 or 30 country songs, right, none of which I'd ever heard before. The Louvin Brothers, who are those guys? But he's sitting here playing, and about 5 feet away from him, Linda Ronstadt and Emmylou Harris sit right down next to each other, facing each other, their faces about 6 inches apart, and sang harmonies and blended their voices for the very first time. Wow. And all of the rest of us watching this, it was like, you could tell it was, not only was it magical, but it was historic. Graham Parsons, Emmylou Harris, and Linda Ronstadt singing together, unbelievable. So I did appreciate that. Good. And yes, I was hanging on by the seat of my pants when we'd play. I'd kind of go, James Burton, try to channel James Burton.
Yeah. How does the myth of Parsons compare with what you knew of him as an actual human being?
I got to know Graham in the last 2 years of his life.
Yeah.
2 months. Sorry.
Right.
I knew it was two something.
2
months or 2.5 months of his life. After the album GP was out, right, on Warner Brothers, those are the songs we played on the road and a few others. And when I went home to Colorado, they went out to LA and started Grievous Angel, the second record. And as everyone knows, or maybe doesn't know, but after Graham's last lead vocal was finished, he went out to party with his ex-girlfriend at Joshua Tree and OD'd and killed himself. And very tragic and very sad. When I was offered the gig, Emmylou Harris was astounding, stunningly beautiful, her voice angelic and just amazing. And they offered me $1,000 for a 1.5-month tour, and I went, $1,000? In 1973, I had never even conceptualized $1,000. And for a 1.5 months, that's nowadays, that's not too much money. Yeah. But Graham, I have to say, unfortunately, was kind of drunk all the time. But when he picked up a guitar and got on stage, him and Emmylou singing together was just fantastic.
Right.
Was unbelievable.
Was Phil Kaufman around at that time?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Road Mangler. Oh, yeah.
He seems like a real character.
He is a real character. He used to hang. So when Graham joined the Byrds, Jim McGuinn and Chris Hillman hired Graham, and they went in the Sweetheart of the Rodeo country version, which was not a commercial success. And people are going, country music, you guys are the Byrds, come on. Yeah. So they went to England, and Graham went and started being a rich boy like he was. He started hanging with Keith Richards and Mick Jagger, and Keith and him became best friends. And he quit the Byrds. He joined the biggest American band, turned them in the country direction, and then quit the band.
Yeah.
So he could hang with Keith, on the south of France. Phil Kaufman, is notorious for having been the road manager for Keith Richards and Graham Parsons when they would, hang out in LA. And Yeah, Phil's a one of a kind guy, I'll tell you.
Yeah, well, it's given what he did after Graham died. Yeah, there's not a lot of people would pull that one off.
Right.
So listen, I'll let you go. I've taken up enough of your time today. Last question. You're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the band. Aside from the volume 2 of Friends and Family, do you have anything else special in the works, you think?
I do want to include 2 or 3 new Firefall songs on Friends and Family too. You know, you are the first person that mentioned the coming 50th anniversary. And it's like, oh my gosh. So Rick, we got together in 1974. So that's next year, 50th anniversary. Our first album came out in 76. It's going to be interesting because, you know, we're already talking about that we need to include some of these Friends and Family songs in our set. And, you know, when we play with a lot of other people, we don't have time to put too many songs in a 45-minute set. But I definitely want to start doing that. We may have to do a 50th anniversary tour and maybe put a record out or something. You know, we're going strong. I'm in my 70s, but other than my arthritis, it feels like I'm still 25 when I'm up on stage. So thank you for the question. And I'm going to have to consider that. You know, what are we going to do for the 50th?
Well, if you're getting all these guest stars to do the covers, cut a few of your old songs and get them to join on those, and you can have new versions of some of those songs, you know?
That sounds great.
And hey, here's another one for you.
Minimum, put out a live album because, you know, we've never really done that. And, you know, songs like Mexico and Strange Way, they just rock live. So great suggestions. I appreciate it. That's have you really, really cool.
Here's another one. Have you written a book? Because you should write a book.
You know, I've started to, and it's going to be centered around the LA rock stars moving to Boulder, into my hometown.
Yeah.
And, you know, but I was telling so many stories on an interview the other day. You know, they were saying, you should tell these, you know, you should write a book about some of this stuff. Obviously. And you know what? I should. Although, you know, most people write books and it's like, oh, more me, you know, and it's like, but it is interesting. And I've been really fortunate. And some of those moments in my musical career with Clapton watching me play, or Linda and Emmylou, or I did a suicide prevention benefit in Nashville that featured Michael McDonald and David Pack from Ambrosia, and Steve Winwood came and sat in.
Yeah.
And here I am singing Gimme Some Lovin' with Steve Winwood right there, and Michael McDonald and David Pack, 3 of the best rock singers ever. And I'm just going, I can die and go to heaven now. It's like, wow. So thank you. Maybe if I get structured enough and say, okay, every morning at 9 a.m. you're writing for an hour. You know, I'm a guitar player. I don't have a lot of discipline.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, yeah, and the problem is you got way too much to do. You got way too many albums and tours and things on the go already. You need to find another couple hours in the day. To that end, sir, I will thank you for your time today. It has really been a pleasure talking to you, and great work on the album. And come to Canada sometime.
Oh man, I'd love to, and we should. I mean, you know, Toronto and Vancouver, it's like 2 of my favorite cities on the planet.
Well, get on up here, brother. All right.
Okay. Hey, thank you for very, very pointed and nice questions. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. You have a good rest of the day, Jock. Talk to you
somewhere
down the road.
Thank you very much.